Welcome, everybody, to the Monday workshop at the Friendly Circle Berlin. My name is Patrick. I'll be your host, and it's our great honor to welcome Dr. Tian Dayton to our group today. Many of you are familiar with Tian. We've been studying her book, Emotional Sobriety, in our Wednesday meetings all of last year. And she's written about 30 books. So she has lots of wonderful writings online. She's had an extraordinary career, which we're going to touch on that today. And she's here to speak about her new book, Growing Up with Addiction. And that will be coming out in March of this year. So this is a very timely talk. We get to get the inside scoop prior to the publication date. So that's very special, Tian. Thank you. So, now, Tian, one of the things that I noticed about you, because I've got to know you pretty well over the last year or so, well, you first spoke for us nearly 3 years ago. But and it's great to see you as always. Thank you for joining us. And on a personal note, what I'd like to say that haven't met you in person and spent time with you in Dublin, I really found you. It's like after 10 minutes, I felt as if I'd known you for a lifetime. And of course, I wanted to talk about you and find out, you were there to talk at our conference, and I wanted to, oh, this is my great chance to spend some time with Tian and find it. But all the time, you seem to want to talk about me and Dublin and Ireland and Irish history. You are full of curiosity, and I love that about you, that beautiful, curious nature. And even though you've had a breadth of academic experience and extraordinary professional career, I think what's really special about you is that all the work that you do seems to come from the heart. It's not, I don't think you set out to build a career. I think you set out because you were called to this work. And yeah, would you like, that's my impression of you. And combined with your lived experience, maybe we'll start with the lived experience part of what brought you to this work. What was it in your own family?
It was my dad's alcoholism and his death and my parents' divorce and how it affected. I grew up in the 1950s and we really didn't understand alcoholism, and we really didn't understand that the family could get sick along with the alcoholic. We just thought if you sort of surgically removed the alcoholic or they sobered up, everything would be fine again. And none of that happened. We were clearly changed, profoundly changed. And in my home there was sexual abuse too, and I haven't talked about this a lot in my career because it was in the family more than with me, but that really doesn't matter. I mean, if it's in the family, it's everyone is exposed. And between those things, or among those things of a divorce, sexual abuse, and dad's, what can you say? Sick mind. He was a real Jekyll and Hyde, just a wonderful father, and then just a real drunk. And the sexual abuse came from the drunk person, and the sober person was not like that. So because we couldn't talk about it, Patrick. I mean, we could pin dad with the label of alcoholic. That was fine. I mean, I think I got the feeling people loved doing that. People couldn't stop labeling it. But I think it was decades later when I realized it wasn't just that everybody was naming dad the alcoholic. They were using it to cancel everything else. See, he's an alcoholic, he's an alcoholic, he's an alcoholic. Nothing else going to see here. But there was so much more to see there. And the not talking about it is the thing. And I think at the core of my mission, and I'm really touched you see it that way. I feel it that way. I didn't really set out. My fantasy used to be, I wanted to have it be a part of an office and have a place where I could put a yogurt in the refrigerator and have a cup of coffee at break. And that was like my fantasy. I mean, I that's what I wanted. And it just kept growing and growing. And I think I put God in charge of it when I had cancer at 35. I remember I just had a serious kind. I got better immediately. I made a deal with God and I said, if you let me raise my children, I'll do anything you say. I'll take your direction from what shows up. And just a lot of wonderful things showed up, and I think it got me out of the way of I work very hard, but I'm not so very strategic. And so all in all, I think I like that. I mean, I haven't been occupied with, is this good for me to do? It's just much more, I need to say all of this. And I think the reason I need to say all of this is because as I worked with in everybody, alcoholics in recovery, family members in recovery, anybody with CPTSD in recovery, I I came upon issues that became very clear to me. And the two major ones I would say, Patrick, are I realized no one talked about grief except with death. Kubler-Ross became quite famous because of her stages of grief, which she actually adapted from John Bowlby, his attachment and loss work. But I realized in reading Bowlby and also reading Kubler-Ross that all of the people I served needed this kind of grief, but their loss lived in an unmarked grave. We lost people while they were living. And it's a much more difficult loss to work with because no one sees it, no one uh, mourns it. You don't get any recognition for it. No black armbands, no funerals, no, take your time and get over this. Nothing. You just die a little bit each day, and then you show up and go to school and go to cheerleading practice and get your homework done and die a little each night, and then come back and do it all again the next day. And everybody's fine, right? Everybody's fine. And it's the ACA's job to join with the enabler in keeping the show on the road. I mean, keep things happening, keep the public not questioning too much, keep things looking normal. That's a looking good family. And then the other big thing besides grief was trauma. When Bessel van der Kolk's work started coming into the field in the 80s, I looked at his symptom list. And the last one was self-medicate with drugs and alcohol if you've been traumatized. And I just thought, well, that kind of takes care of that. I mean, that's everything I see every day. This trauma thing is exactly right. And it's exactly right that it's moving into the field. We talked about it too much as event trauma then. It's really for us as ACAs and people in the addictions world, I think it is both event trauma because there are a bunch of scary scenes that happen with alcoholism. And it's also relational trauma. It's that drip, drip, drip of daily alienation and loss and confusion and chaos and adaptation and nervous system dysregulation that you need to untangle and get over. And that's why I wrote this book, which just arrived yesterday. And if I'd been strategic, I'd have, yeah, I've got a bunch of copies. I would have held one up. So maybe, maybe I can get somebody's attention to bring me a copy in a minute. But it arrived. Our grandson was here for his 13th birthday. We talked about this. And that is everything to me, right? That is the family not repeating history. And of course, you're going to repeat some history. We all do. But my husband's an ACA, and we really started very young trying not to repeat the history, trying to get as much as help as we could, which meant a lifetime of help. And it's really why I became a therapist. I thought I really just need to be around this 5 days a week. And because I was so codependent, I thought, I've got a great idea. I'll learn about it and I'll help everybody else. And luckily, eventually, I realized how much help I also needed. But I really went into it um, thinking, not only do I need this, but I don't even have to admit to needing this because I can just learn and help. It was just an automatic adaptation from childhood. There was not a me nearly as much as there was an us. So it became evident in my learning that I needed this. And then it became evident that my husband needed this. And then it was the not passing down through the generations. So there is our beautiful grandson with us, and he's our first, and we have four, but he was the first one, and that is the day the book arrived. So I felt that yesterday was beyond so special, and he was, he just came in with his mom for the night. Um, and the rest of the family wasn't that with him. But that for everything, that's everything for me. That's everything. That's why the book was written. That's why the career happened. And we've, touched wood. Where's wood? We've passed, passed down a normal amount, but so far so good. It's hanging together. Everybody's got their issues, problems, this and that, but people can manage and I it was just for my husband and I an incredibly special day. And to have the book
Yeah,
come that day was just remarkable universe message.
it absolutely sounds like on the day of your grandson's birthday. And thank you for sending me that little video snippet of
Yeah,
your grandson.
yeah.
What an insightful young man.
I know.
It's obviously something's rubbed off.
Oh, he's way ahead of where I ever was at it. I mean, he's got one of those brains. He was talking about the science of addiction there
Yeah, yeah,
because he was interested from not the addict's point of view, from I think we were talking about addiction in general, including screen addiction, and he said, "Well, Gaga, something." He named me Gaga when he couldn't say Grammy, and he said something very miraculous is happening when an addict can let
yeah.
that go because they are working. Their brain is fighting them every step of the way. And he said so many interesting things. I said, Frieza, let me turn on my phone and please say that again because the idea that you're at war with your own brain. And I was interested actually in what you thought about that.
Well, I do believe that alcoholism is an addiction is an internal civil war.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I was at war with myself for years and beating myself up and hating myself and the remorse and the mornings after and all that. Yeah.
He
And
was
then,
explaining that
yeah,
on
yeah.
a what?
Neuroscientific level. Yeah.
Yes, yes,
With dopamine. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
yeah, the addiction field needs him.
yeah,
But
yeah.
it's great. I mean, he's 13. I think you had kind of an awakening in the family when you were 14. Is that when you were going to Alateen as a teenager,
Well, I
right?
didn't really go to Alateen. My mother went to Al-Anon
Okay.
and would tell me everything she learned, all the good stuff that she thought I could absorb. And I went to a few Alateen meetings. But I'm embarrassed to admit it, but it's just the truth. And at one point, they turned to me and said, "So we don't tell us about your problems." And I said what was true for me, but I felt so embarrassed by their response. I said, "Well, I don't look at them as problems. I look at them as stepping stones to building a better me." And everybody in the room just kind of went, "Whoa, whoa," and I didn't mean to act like I was trying to be a smart aleck. I just was, that is what I did every day. I got up and thought, okay, what can I see in this that I can do something good with, you know?
Yeah.
That I mean, it
Yeah.
was sincere. So then I didn't keep going to Alateen. Of course, I picked up Al-Anon, in my 20s, but I did everything else. I mean, that's why I understand you have to have the right help when you're young because it's tricky to be young and to have to self-examine too soon in psychological terms. You need to build enough self to be able to tolerate that. And I don't know that at the time I had built enough of an infrastructure. So I was much a part of the Greek church. My family is very religious. And I would say that was there were two spiritual awakenings. There were tons, but the two I think about. One was just being a member of the church. And we were kind of a big deal family. We were a very big deal family in the church, particularly my grandfather and all of us. And my grandparents were pretty really humble church people, but successful, took every Greek that came to Minneapolis, gave everybody a job, everything, housed them, fed them. And my father being kind of full of bravado and wonderful, but different from that. We were all kind of conceited. I wasn't so much as because I was the youngest and I hadn't quite figured it out, but everybody in my family seemed to think we were a big, so know-it-all. And I remember when everything was falling apart in my family, I was with one of my church gang at the house of one of the kids. And, my mother didn't work. My father was making money, but we were in private school. We were successful. And this family was, the mother came home from a waitress job. The father was exhausted. And they, with so much joy, made us the most delicious sloppy Joe and Greek salad dinner I'd ever had in my life. And they had a really ordinary house and all the kinds of things we were getting distance from in my family too, to our foolishness. Um, and I remember stopping and on these creaky stairs and looking around. And in the way you think when you're a child, you don't sort of think critically, but you think critique. And I remember just looking around and thinking, "Oh, my family's mistaken. My family's mistaken. This is what to want in life. What that this house holds is joy." And I hadn't had my mother make a meal for my kids in my life, and my friends. Not that she wasn't nice to them, but she was very nice to them, but they were taking care of us. They were feeding us. And they were tired and they were loving it. And there was more love in that family in that house than was in mine at that time. And my values just went back to normal. And that was one. And then another was when everybody had left our house and it was just mom and me. I remember being alone on a Saturday night, which, if you're a teen with a lot of friends is unusual. But this night I was, and I was so lonely. And I remember looking out into the black night and hearing a voice. And not a voice as words, I just knew a voice and I heard the words. But it was just, you are not alone. I don't know if it was in words, it was in presence, I knew with my whole soul that I could never be alone if I were not alone. I mean, that I was held. I knew it, and I've known it ever since. And that, I think, taught me something that has been with me all my life, that it's impossible to be alone. And I will follow with one other short story. I had a near-death experience and I didn't know about near-death so much experiences, but I had one. And then I read about them. And the takeaway for me from just visiting and then coming back, was that there's no such thing as dying alone. There is no being alone. There's no alone. It's all community. And, I would think people would say, oh, he died alone, or that little dog died on the street or something. No, that little dog was lifted up and that person was cared for before a nanosecond passes. There is there is no such thing as being alone in my mind. So I don't know if I answered your questions, but
Well, that's this whole idea of disconnection, And then when we come into recovery, the healing comes in connection, the we of the
You
program.
know, you make me think of what Freestyle, my grandson, said to me yesterday. Um, he said that in Europe, if there is sex in a movie and there is killing in the movie that has sex in it will be rated uh, PG, and the one that has killing will be rated R. R is the one adults, right? That's the adult. If in America there is sex in a movie and killing in a movie, the movie with killing will be rated PG, and the movie with sex will be rated R. Now,
Wow.
speaking of having it backwards, I mean, sex is connection. I mean, not that you want your kid out, but to pathologize that and to normalize killing, we've got something remarkably backwards in our country, and we are full out evidence showing it to the world now.
Well, I'm glad a 13-year-old has that insight. It gives me some hope for the next. Maybe we need a generation with a different insight than the ones we've had so far because
Oh
we
yeah.
we're in such a mess.
I feel I want him to lead. I mean, he's
Yeah,
just born on the cusp of this Z and whatever, but on right on the cusp. He's a very young version of that one and an older version of the other. And I think will be having a lot of leaders born, a lot.
we need them.
We need them.
Well, also, I mean, you came up at a time in the 70s, right, where all this was new. This was some of the early people, and I know that you've met them all. There was Claudia Black, Sharon Wersheiser, Cruz, um, Janet Wolitz,
Wait,
the
yeah,
Woititz,
Robert
yeah,
Ackerman,
yeah. Who was the on
Roxy
that
Lerner,
out of because these were all people who were around at the beginnings of
Jade Middleton
ACOA,
Laws. Yeah. And we're all
and
friends.
yeah, I know
It's so
that you.
great.
Yeah, I noticed Claudia Black give a great endorsement for your book.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Claudia
believe
and I
you
have,
did you work together was it at the
oh
Meadows?
yeah, we do.
Yes.
Still we do.
You
Yeah.
do still, yeah.
Mhm.
So your first introduction to ACOA, could you tell us about that? That was in because you were in New York where it all began, right?
No, I was in Minnesota.
Oh, you were in Minnesota.
Actually, at the time we lived, how it happened, we were living in Pennsylvania. We'd spent 5 years affiliated with an ashram, living basically next to it, following yoga, meditation, learning everything like that. Had two children in that milieu, very healthy, very everything. And then we found out the Swami was doing some of the things some of these Swamis did, and we decided to leave. And at that moment, I think it was at that moment or right that year, uh, when we decided to leave, we decided to leave. We were actually on our way out. We were going to move to London because my husband was complaining before we ever even found out about the Swami. He was complaining about the way people did business. I said, "What would you do if you just had a fantasy?" He said, "I'd be an art dealer." And I said, "Well, let's go." I didn't want to stick around anyway. As much as I liked it, I didn't see it as a forever lifestyle. And it wasn't more spiritual than any place else, I found out. It wasn't more spiritual than Times Square. Spirituality was here. And but I liked it. I just didn't want to uh, but because he became creepy, we kind of had to leave fast. We wanted to get out of there. And we went to Minnesota, which is where our parents live, where we grew up. We've known each other since we were young. And we stayed the summer before going to London. So during that summer, my mother, I can't quite sequence these two events, but anyway, mom knew Sharon Wegscheider Cruz because her husband, my stepfather, allocated money from this fund they have to give Sharon to get Sharon's master's. And so Sharon and mom was very progressive. She wasn't always enough therapy. In fact, any therapy, but she got some, but not enough. But we had Sharon come and work with our family. And then that was an ACOA because Sharon was talking about ACOAs. Sharon fought for ACAs, part of giving them a name. Janet Whititz gave them the name. Well, Tony A actually named the group. But all in this little period of time, there was also the first ACA conference. That might have been when we returned from London. But Sharon worked with my family because I said, Mom, we need something. Do you know anybody? And she said, Well, I do know this woman who does these family things. And I said, Well, let's do it. We're going to be here for 2 months. Let's just do it. So everything changed. Sharon looked at me. We were all gathering in the living room, and I was talking to her, and she said, she has these long red fingernails. She's going, when I sense something, but everybody else is saying it's something different, I feel crazy. And of course, she knew she was talking directly to me. And I remember just at the time thinking, okay, I'll follow you anywhere. You're the first person who's, put words on what I've experienced all these years. So we worked with Sharon. The first exercise she gave us is sculpt the family as you see. Everybody sculpt the family as you see it, right? So it's my first exposure to psychodrama also. And the idea that we all had permission to see the family differently. I mean, I was the fourth in line of a Greek family. We saw nothing differently, but we were supposed to see it all the same. And I saw everything differently, and I felt crazy. And I was called, out on it. Don't disagree. Don't point that out. So that and the other 2 days were very liberating. And then I think fast forward maybe a year and a half and or two, we were visiting, and there was an ACA conference. I don't remember if it happened before the conference was before this or after this. That's what I can't remember. But the first ACA conference was at Disney World in Orlando. And we went with my mom, my husband and I, and we brought our little daughter with us and took turns going to things and playing with her. And we made plans to have dinner with mom. This is so, I'm laughing because I'm not crying. And mom, we had a 400 people circle to close the conference. It was so interesting. It was just light bulb after light bulb after light bulb. Oh, this happened before I went to England. Okay, so light bulb after light bulb. Then a big circle, 400 people singing, We Shall Overcome or something like that. And my mother running from one end of the circle across in pure drama to me, right? I'll never leave you again. She did nothing but come in and out of my life as a teenager. And I was so moved and I thought, oh, we're cured. We've gotten there. And that night she stood us up for dinner. I mean, it was so unbelievable. It was funny, but it was sad. She got a better invite. She got a better, So that's kind of how I lived. And that's kind of how I decided I got to go for this thing because my family's got it wrong and I've got to figure out how to get it right. That came before, and then we moved to Europe, and then when we came, I can't remember the sequence. It doesn't matter. But when I came back from London, we lived there for a couple of years. I worked again with Sharon for 5 days doing psychodrama. She did one of these 5-day programs, and then everything changed. I changed the direction of my profession. I was already a therapist, but I went towards psychodrama. I changed everything woke up inside of me because of psychodrama. The ACA movement got me started because there was finally a name for what. Oh, actually, can I tell you there was a before to this when we were still at the Institute?
Hmm.
So this is how first started with this. Brant and I had our little girl. We were visiting his mother in New York City. Beautiful sort of Fifth Avenue apartment, busy. He was working at the time during the days. I was with his mother who was drunk during the day and her cook. I was with her cook and his mother occasionally and Marina. So I thought I was going nuts being in this apartment with trying to negotiate this drunkenness and my new baby and I would just spend, thank God the cook was there to talk to. And I left early. I looked at my husband. I said, I'm getting out of this booby hatch. And I took a bus back to where we lived in Pennsylvania, where the ashram was, in the snow. Um, I found a book that We Like Whitney, a friend, had given us called I'll Quit Tomorrow by Vernon Johnson. It had come out with Hazelden. And I read it cover to cover twice while taking care of an infant. So during nap, during the hour here, but I was wrapped with curiosity. This happened before all the other stuff I just told you about. And I thought, okay, something is wrong with us. Something's wrong with me, and I think it's wrong with him too. Uh, but it doesn't have a name. But what it sounds the most like from this book is dry drunk syndrome. So I said, maybe it's possible that living around addiction, you can mimic the behaviors without the alcohol. Because we were dry as a bone. Uh, and that's really the core of my work, is to get ACAs to understand that we are dry drunks. And all that means, which is what this book is about, Patrick, everything that means to be a dry drunk or to have CPTSD. And we are as sick as alcoholics. And we don't get better. Alcoholics get better. They can put down the drug and they get very humble, and very willing to take fearless moral inventories and all of that because you tell me, but I've always interpreted that you feel your sobriety depends upon it, your life depends upon it. Everything good that's coming in through sobriety is going to go, and you know what the bottom looks like. Am I articulating that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that
Okay.
book was written for alcoholics. That was written about alcoholics,
I
Vernon
knew, but there
Johnson.
was no such thing as an ACA back then.
That's right. That's
Oh,
right.
okay. But I knew we acted like we were drunk. We'd have
Yeah.
fights. And
Yeah.
I'd
It's
look at my
so
husband and think,
interesting.
I remember
Yeah.
saying that we sound like we're drunk. And why
Hmm.
are we drunk? We don't drink. We don't anything. We were at a yoga community,
Hmm.
eating yogurt drinks. Um, so I understood that about myself and I understood it about him. And I understood that between us, we were really recreating this sick atmosphere, each from a different alcoholic home. But then that was when I realized I just started on the first step. And I said, I'm powerless over I mean, I knew I was powerless over something, and I thought it might be just me. Whatever I carried inside, I was powerless over. And I needed to turn my life and will over, and I needed to have a spiritual awakening and that's just where I started working this stuff sort of by myself.
Yeah, and then it wasn't till when 1983, Janet
Yeah,
Wolitich published Adult Children of Alcoholics,
yeah, and
popularizing the laundry list. And so the laundry list is kind of behaviors, right? And then
exactly.
at some point, I mean, in the development from just a behavioral addiction, you're looking at, and then the trauma piece came in. Was that when did that? Who brought that
Well, you've
into?
articulated that. I brought it in really to our field.
That's what I was
Uh,
thinking. Yeah,
Bessel brought it into the mental health world. I read Self-Medicate with Drugs and Alcohol, and I thought somebody's got to write a book on this and make this connection for the world between trauma and addiction. But I don't think it should be me. I'm too new in the field. So 10 years went by and nobody had written the book. So I wrote the book on trauma and addiction, and it's not a perfect book, but I introduced, once I wrote that book, trauma and addiction was like a grass fire in the field. I mean, within months of its coming out, every conference was called trauma and addiction articles, you know. I mean, nobody ever quite put it together. Some people put it together that I brought it in, or maybe a lot of people do, but um,
It was the ACOA Trauma Syndrome, that book. Is that the
I
book?
did it that afterwards. I
Afterwards.
I did that when I felt I knew enough about ACOAs. I did emotional sobriety first, but then my song in my heart was really for ACOAs. I wanted to call that book a love letter to ACOAs,
Wow.
you know? My college
Maybe
roommate, hmm?
maybe your current book is that.
My current book is a love letter to ACOAs.
Interesting.
It is absolutely. And people like us with CPTSD who've been traumatized in the home by their parents, which is the scariest and creepiest and most lasting trauma. I mean, war trauma, rape trauma, it's so hideous, it's unthinkable and unspeakable, but it's out there. But this kind of trauma we have, this with the parent trauma, it just does you in. And that's the cognitive distortion piece. Which I have a chapter on. And you have to make sense of it with zero equipment. You have to make sense of why the people you love the most are hurting you so profoundly. So little children, because they just don't have the developmental equipment to say, this is what's happening and I see it and it's coming from, say, what am I doing wrong? What's wrong about me? Why can't I get it right? Why can't my parents be happy? Why can't I fit into my family? Why do they keep yelling at me? And then, but children, they, because they're children, blame themselves. We blame ourselves.
Mhm.
And we
Yeah.
carry that through life and we personalize everything.
Yeah. Well, Tin, I'd love to, delve into all this. We could create an incredible historical archive of the development of this movement in recovery, because you've been part of so much of it. And but I want to get onto the book, but I would like to touch on Jacob Moreno because
Mhm.
he was really ahead of himself.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, I mean, he wanted during the 50s to produce a television show
Yes.
and he did something in California had those big state hospitals. There was one in Camarillo. These were state mental hospitals, essentially. They were called, I don't know, psychiatric
Yeah.
institutions. And they were all over California. There's one I was in the
Mm.
other day. I was up in in Santa, not Santa Elena, but up in Northern California.
Mm.
And these were huge institutions. This was the places that Reagan closed down, where everybody ended up on the street because there was
Well,
nowhere to
that was
go.
the social workers. That was
Yeah,
the social workers.
but he
Yeah.
did a thing there where he produced like you did in Dublin with the that work you were doing. He was doing it with a large group, and they were showing it throughout all of the wards in these institutions so that the patients could see it being done. This psychodrama that he did. But and then I was reading somewhere where there was a television producer wanted him to put it on national television, but it didn't. It didn't fly because he didn't feel the ethics were right and the safety issues and all of that. But I mean, I was just thinking of where we are today with everything we're doing on YouTube and in these Zooms and
He
everything else.
foresaw all that.
He foresaw it all back in the 50s. And so I know that you worked with his wife, Zurka.
Yeah.
She was in Brooklyn, right?
Zurka, Moreno and Zurka met here. Listen, that's another story. But anyway, they had a hospital in Beacon, New York, and I have a house an hour away from that. So I trained with Zurka for for the rest of my life from in my 30s, I guess. And she was my mentor, friend, everything. And Zurka really created Patrick, what we know of as psychodrama today. Moreno created the brainchild and the form, but he did not do psychodrama very well. He did it kind of like theater. Come on up, we'll play act this. Why don't you come and play this way? It is Zurka who turned it into a clinical model. And one of my next passions, and I'm at an age where I just get possessed with these needs to get this said before I drop dead. And one is now to train people on how to do psychodrama properly, because Zurka had perfect classical clean lines because she created the uh, the manner of doing it. Zurka added uh, the empty chair. Zurka cleaned up the architecture. She was really a kind of a genius on her own. To train with Zurka was to learn every time. And she wasn't even there. She was so quiet and so unassuming, but the drama, you came out different. And she would do the sharing for so long you wanted to fall off your chair, but you would come out not carrying stuff. She was so astute when you needed to work. The first time I met her, I was in a group of 150 maybe in Rhinebeck. And I had just parted with our two little dogs for a long story reason. And I was feeling so terrible. And out of 100, we had never met personally. And she walked over to me and she said, you look like you could do some work. And being an ACA, I of course said, no, no, I'm fine. And she said, no, something's going on. And she said, why don't you come up and we'll do a drama? And I ended up choosing somebody to play each dog, and in moving into the child, I could never, I got cancer. We wanted to have, or I wanted to have a third child. And I couldn't because I had to have a hysterectomy. That it turned out to be a good thing, but I had never mourned that. I had never anything, and she saw all that. Suddenly, this drama about the dogs turned into everything else. And I thought in my mind, oh, I'm taking up so much space, I'm boring them to death. Nobody's going to understand how attached I get to dogs. I looked around in the sharing phase, and everybody's in tears and talking about their dog and their dog and their dog. So from that moment on, I understood that this was a very mystical, layered experience in which you could enter what we call, or what she called, a psychodramatic trance state that is very brain repatterning. So it's so important, Patrick, that people understand this and do it carefully and thoughtfully without these huge abreactive catharses as goal, but a slow and methodical catharsis of integration. And this is where Steve Porges comes in. This is where Peter Levine come in. And I've just had the beautiful experience in life of getting to know them all, and but have I integrated their work into my work before I ever met any of them, before I met Bessel or anybody. And then they understood it immediately. And it's Steve who looked at my model and just said, you're healing you've created a different way to do therapy, which I have through floor checks, and you're healing everybody through co-regulation. So I was solving, because I was consulting so much and doing so much program development in the addictions field. I was solving this dilemma of big groups under training, and also of, because of that, and because it's an addictions field and we love drama, everybody wanted to scream at their parents. And that's fine for a while, but eventually you've got to come up with something else. There's more. You have to have nervous system regulation. It's ground zero for recovery. And until you get regulated, you're going to get overwhelmed. And then even in a psychodrama, you get overwhelmed. And then you act out rather than integrate slowly the new knowledge, the new understanding. So treatment needs what I've created with RTR, and the treatment world knows it because when they have it, it solves their problems.
Yeah, it's a beautiful model because it's easy to learn. I mean,
It's easy
I
to.
know what treatment world is like. I have friends and, they get sober and all of a sudden they're working as a counselor in a rehab a couple of years later, and then finally they have a relapse because they think they're doing meetings by going to work every day. You
You
know,
just you
and all of
just
a
summed
sudden
it
the
up.
rehab needs somebody else, and there's a revolving door of people coming in. But your model is very, I mean, I could do it.
Yeah, you could
After
do it.
watching you in Dublin, you know what I
I
mean? I
want
thought
you to
I could
do
do
it.
that.
I want you to.
No, it was
That's
it.
another
Yeah,
conversation.
yeah. Well, parts of it.
The
You know what
floor
I mean?
checks. The floor checks.
The floor checks,
Well,
the floor
that's the
checks
whole
are great.
part. That's the whole part. You don't need to do anything else besides floor checks.
Yeah, yeah.
That's where the healing is.
Yeah, so everybody, it's on our YouTube channel. We just published it. It's Tian in Dublin doing the showing, demonstrating our RTR model. So you
Oh,
can all
may I
become
say, can I say,
counselors by the end of the week.
but you, well, here's where that model held, right? I mean, that was a big group. So 2 days they had these excellent presenters because I know they were so good because I sat in the day of each of them. Cece with IFS and Jan with polyvagal and felt sense. And but there's less interaction, right? I mean, you might interact inside yourself and do a process, couple of people might go in front and demonstrate, but all this stuff is coming up inside the group and it doesn't have anywhere to go except the lunch table and complaints to you about, like the food or the housing. That's where it goes. That's where it goes. We know that. So I thought, God, I've got to give the group some sharing time. So when you watch that film, all of you, know that we are bursting out 2 days of held feeling. And we couldn't get past the second prompt.
Yeah.
I mean, we could have used 2 days of that because people were so dying to share. They didn't even need anything but to have a question to share on. And then, boom, the room just.
Yeah, they were like, "Oh, Tian, we don't want to start again. Can we just talk amongst ourselves?" We're doing just fine. But anyway, I want to get onto the book because that's what we brought you here to talk about. I mean, we could talk all day about, all these other things, and that's what I really enjoyed about meeting you, that this conversational thing was easy. And maybe we'll do more of this
Sure.
with in the future. But growing up with addiction, your new book, your love letter to ACAs, I noticed in the way it's written, you talk about it being more of a roadmap than a destination, and you didn't write it to fix anyone, but just to really give people that roadmap. And I noticed the way that it's laid out each chapter, make a great workbook study. Anybody here wants to start a book study? This would be a great book for a book study. The way it's broken up, each chapter has, if it's the let me go through the chapters. The first chapter is the family system and relational trauma, so a kind of an overview. Second chapter, the body remembers and then we go on to survival roles. Chapter 5, guessing at normal. Chapter 6, triggers as teachers. Chapter 8, grief and the inner child. And chapter 9, boundaries. Chapter 10, spiritual transformation and growth. So just to give you an idea then of the way it's laid out is that Tian sort of goes into the subject matter, then she has the case studies, and then she has the exercises. So you could take it chapter by chapter, right? Tian, is that what you
Oh,
had
I
in mind?
designed it. I
Yeah,
actually designed it for that. So that's people did that with emotional sobriety because at
yeah.
the last minute I put a page in saying, do your own group. And I forgot to do that this time. But this book is perfectly suited for that kind of, cohort.
Yeah.
And
It's
it can be now, it can be virtual, it can be in person, it can be,
right,
yeah.
right, right. I can see it. I can see it really working for a book study in that respect. We did that with your emotional sobriety book, where we would take a reading, a portion of a chapter.
Hmm.
We would read it, and then we created reflective questions
Hmm. Hmm. I
to
remember you showed me that. I thought it was
yeah,
great.
yeah, yeah. So that worked real well.
But
but
this one
having,
doesn't need leadership, I think. They can just
yeah,
get together and in the time between read the chapter and
yeah.
then do the exercise and get together as a group and share the exercise and then just share.
Right, right. So that's how I see it. Is there something specifically that you'd like to touch upon in the book that you feel is like maybe a really important
The
place to
cognitive
start?
distortions,
Cognitive distortions.
attachment wounds and the cognitive distortions. Let me just see if I can get the attention of somebody. I'm gonna quiet my mic for one. I was gonna see if I could get somebody to bring the book to me. But maybe that will happen. I'll find it and I'll put it in the chat,
Yeah.
the picture. I think that the way if we start with the nervous system because that's what needs regulating. That is ground zero. And if it is dysregulated, your thinking will be black and white, your behavior will be black and white, and your emotions will be, dysregulated. 0
Mm,
to 10, 10 to 0 with no speed bumps in between. We want 4, 5, and 6. And 4, 5, and 6 is actually where the action is. If we're overreacting or underreacting, we're still outside of a functional range where we can think about what we feel. If we're in 4, 5, and 6, we can live our life and have our thinking on board, making sense of it as we go. We can be awake and aware and not stuck in extremes. So we want to go for this get regulated and understand what dysregulation is and what it does. And then we want to understand how attachment wounds get passed along through projection transference and overreactions. And we really have to get clear on pausing. We need to understand how to take that pause and self-reflect. And if in order to do that, you need some balance in your nervous system. Because otherwise there's no pausing. Once your overreaction kicks in, the past and the present are overlapped because of the way the brain processes trauma. The
mm,
brain, the thinking mind, prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus that provides context go offline sort of when you're terrified. So that means that you're lost in fight flight and you're not making meaning. You're not thinking about what's happening and you're not putting it in any order. There's no past present in it because the part of your brain that would contextualize and timestamp experience isn't operating. So you're left with what the limbic system gathers as sense memories, sense impressions, sight, sounds, textures, and emotions, because the limbic system processes emotions. You've got a lot of feeling in your body, a lot of activation or shut down activation, and a lot of, sounds and familiar images and stuff. So that when you get triggered by somebody's tone of voice or their facial expression or their the way they're moving or with the outfit they're wearing. When you get triggered, you just can't stand it because all of this sensorial information, the sights, sounds, and the feelings that never got processed come jettisoning to the surface, and you think, "How could you do this to me? You're terrible. You're awful." Well, that person triggered something from the past, and the overreaction belongs to the past. If you don't take that pause, you're going to be convinced that that person is the person responsible for the way you feel. And you're not going to be quiet inside until you can fix them or get rid of them or tell them off or get away or whatever. And that's why you need the regulation to kind of go, why am I reacting so strongly when what happened can't be isn't as big a deal as what's getting, I'm way overreacting here. And I got to figure out why. And then the reflection comes. If your nervous system can stay regulated enough so you can sort of breathe through this and let the memories come up to the surface, you can start to make sense of the imagery that's arising. And you can start to say, well, maybe that was then, but maybe this is now, and maybe they're not the same. And you can take ownership and responsibility for what's going on inside you and the big overreaction you're having. And just don't try to figure it all out for the moment, but be aware enough to slow life down and be humble enough to say, maybe I'm not just right because I feel like I'm right. That's a cognitive distortion. It's I feel it so strongly, therefore it must be true. Uh, well, that's just not the case, you know.
Mm,
Uh, we have to separate the past from the present somehow. Otherwise,
mm.
because the brain has confused them, there is no time stamping. So when you get triggered, the past and the present kind of come up like this. And we
Yeah.
have to get them to do a little bit of this.
Hmm.
And that's healing.
Hmm.
And then floor checks are set up so everybody gets a little bit mildly triggered and they name something, they share something, they listen without blowing up because the structure doesn't allow them to blow up. And then they heal a little bit. And then they
Hmm.
move on and they end that little soft activation. It has a beginning, middle, and an end. There's a structure. And the brain wants structure. So this floor check structure gets the group moving through these little mini inner activations and sharing and hearing and kind of bringing a little bit more understanding and closure. And that's a group process that can go on for an hour. That's the only thing you need in the addictions field to really start to change people. If you add role play, timelines and role plays and social atoms, which are part of the model, then you can embody personal dramas. You can talk to your inner child. You can talk to the mother you had then. You can talk to the father, you can lay out your family and see who's close to who's far from here. And so there are processes that allow the past, the present, all to emerge on a timeline so that you can start to see that, wait a minute, that happened back then, but I'm carrying the feelings through and recreating that pain now. And who do I need to talk to in order to resolve that or bring some closure to that pain? And that's the attachment wound healing part. And then the social atom, which is the family map, essentially uh, brings in who's close, who's distant, where am I vis-a-vis the system. And you can put it into a sculpture, you can put it on a page, and you can talk to anyone in that you want to, including yourself. And you can reverse roles with yourself inside the structure, come back out, talk to yourself inside. And so you get some elasticity and perspective by reversing roles. When you see psychodrama without role reversal, you're not seeing psychodrama. And from my point of view as a psychodramatist and a trainee of Zurka's, it is damaging not to use role reversal because psychodrama is so intense and so brain repatterning that if you're not adding the perspective taking of role reversal so that you see from both sides, you're really reinforcing and nailing in your one perspective. And that's the last thing you want to do.
Beautiful. Yeah, but I can see so much post-traumatic growth coming out of doing this work. And I love how, you come from that 12-step background, which gives
Yeah.
us a container.
Yeah.
What we try to do in this group is just bring in these ideas that augment. We're not trying to replace 12-step work. We're trying to say, I still go to my AA meetings
Of course.
regularly. I love them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have so many ACAs, and I've learned so much from the ACAs who've come to our group. And yeah, so we'll get into the questions and answer time now. But yeah, I mean, we could go on forever. This is
Yeah, we
great.
could go on forever, but you see it all so clearly, Patrick. I mean, when you say that's for the post-traumatic growth, we're right alongside in the model that because you're exactly right.
Hmm.
That's how the post-traumatic, and it happens just little piece by piece. You know what I mean? It's very
Yeah.
metabolizable.
Yeah. And it's powerful, powerful stuff, Tian.